Welcome to the Raising Values podcast, where the traditional family talks. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. You can support the Raising Values podcast through Patreon. Phil and Gillian are behind the mic, and we hope you enjoy the show. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Raising Values podcast. We're finally home and refreshed, I guess you could say.
We were refreshed.
We were until yesterday.
Last 2 weekends.
Even though the trip was refreshing, it really was a great time. And I hope you were able to listen to the Raising Values episode that we did in Arkansas with our Matter of Facts patrons and our tribe, and it was so much fun. If you're not a patron of Matter of Facts or Raising Values, you certainly should become one. Next year is looking like it's going to be even bigger and better. We say that every year, and it truly is bigger and better every year. So for all that exclusive information on the Matter of Facts patrons only family camping trip, check it out on the Matter of Facts page. But we're home, and then we decided to tackle more projects, and of course we decided to do every last thing to get. So Piper asked for a total redo of her bedroom for her birthday, and we decided to tackle all that in one day. So we're both a little tired. We're both in here in our pajama pants, so we look good up and then we're kind of done.
Well, to be fair, me and my brother-in-law started this last weekend with taking her the queen-size loft bed that I built years and years ago with a little bit of help from friends. And we shortened it 1.5 feet, lowered it 3.5, 4 feet. I mean, like, we totally reconfigured that bed to be a ground level bed, but still have enough clearance underneath it for the drawers Piper wanted underneath it. It's been like 2 weekends of back pain, basically.
Anyway, so we're here, and this episode, Phil and I have decided to name it Walking in Faith, and I think it is one of the most important shows that or episodes that we'll do, mainly because I think it is going to express exactly what and who Phil and I are, and how we are raising our child and our family. And we're going to talk about our Christian values and faith during hard times and good times, and our walk in the church, and the sometimes unfortunate events that have occurred that I can't imagine is only that has only happened to me and Phil.
No.
I would think that it has happened in many, many people's lives as they've walked through their faith and in traditional religion, such as any church, really.
Well, and I think I could just be, totally off base, but like, I suspect there are a lot of people out there that have lost touch with their faith in Christianity as a result of being let down by the church, by individual churches, or even individual sects of Christianity.
Yeah, and I think let's get there before we dive into the last part of the episode that we have planned. But the reason I wanted to bring this episode to the Raising Values podcast was because that is, this is one of the hashtags that we use is Christian values, and we talk about our faith. And I think we've talked about our faith in every episode that we've done so far. Maybe not the one on the camping trip, but it's such a fundamental part of who we are. And I don't want people to look at us and think, well, they act a certain way on the Raising Values podcast, they sound a certain way on the Raising Values podcast, but when you switch over to Matter of Facts, or if you know them in real life, they're not as strong of a Christian, or they don't act like this, or whatever. And so I guess I kind of just want to lay it all out there and be like, look, this is who we are. This is how we believe. This is our faith. This is our walk with Christ. And this is what we mean when we say Christian values, and what we mean when we say we're raising a Christian household. And so that was my intro. It was a lot longer and more drawn out than I had planned, but
that's why I told you to intro it this time. I knew you had it. You had all that just waiting there on the tip of the tongue to get out.
I wanted to talk about this for so long, not just for Raising Values, but in matter of facts. And well, it's something that you and I talk about a lot too. This is a conversation that you and I have all the time about our Christian values and what does it mean to us. And when we are faced with certain obstacles with raising Piper, we do reflect back on our Christian values and we do discuss, what should we do as a family that is in Christ? What should we do here? And we do pull from the hardships that we have gone through in the church, and we do pull from the good times that we've had in the church. But then for the most part, we pull from our own personal faith and our own personal walk with Christ.
And I think that's probably more, I'm sure we're going to get into this a lot in depth, but I feel like that is honestly probably the linchpin behind our view on Christianity and our values and how we live it, is that you and I both have the personality that our faith, our beliefs, our own conversation with our Creator is a personal one. It's not one that's dictated by the Pope or by a priest or by or a preacher or even by mainstream Christianity. You and I have talked, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it in a minute, but there are certain aspects of what is, I guess, colloquially assumed to be mainstream Christian belief that I don't personally hold, and I can't find an analog in the Bible, in Old Testament or New Testament. I can't find anything in the teachings that leads me to believe that this thing that I've been told is a part of Christianity is. So I reject it, because I say, if you can't find it in the Bible, if you can't find it in the teachings of Jesus Christ, I'm not willing to accept that. And I think that is that's probably a very unique part of our viewpoint on Christianity, is that you and I are very comfortable pushing back against things other people tell us. Well, this is part of Christianity. It's no, it's not. I don't believe that. I talk with God and talk with Jesus, and I pray all the time. Mm-hmm. I've read the Bible. So just because you say it doesn't make it true, and doesn't mean I'm going to accept it wholehearted.
And talking about pushing back, I started pushing back when I was probably Piper's age, about 8, 9, 10. I started pushing back and asking questions, because I was raised in a Baptist church. My parents, my father was Catholic, or his family was Catholic. My mother was Methodist. But when we moved to North Louisiana, there weren't that many Catholic and Methodist churches up there. There are some, but ultimately we ended up in a Baptist church, and we ended up in 2. Actually, we went to one, and then we went to another one. A lot of what came out of those churches and from those people didn't make a lot of sense to me. And I say that not just in the sermons and the songs and things like that, but personal views of how I'm gonna break away for a second, and then it's 3 down. We should probably flip this. Yeah.
Okay. Let's do an audible on the play, and we'll start with being let down by the church, why faith and organized religion aren't always the same thing.
Yeah. So back to my story, being raised in a Baptist church, and I don't have anything against the Baptist religion or anything like that. I think everyone is going to walk in their faith with Christ the way that they feel the most comfortable with. And the Baptist church, for me, wasn't comfortable. And when we came home at the end of the day, in our real life, we weren't, I don't want to say we weren't on show of being these great Christians because we were at church with other great Christians. I was able to see really how my parents would lead that through. You know what I'm saying? Keep that going throughout the week. And my father did an amazing job. He was my first teacher. He was my first real teacher in Christianity. And what's so amazing is my father didn't come to Christ until he was married to my mother, which was in his late 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And so he did not lead a life of being a Christian. He didn't walk in faith through most of his life up until that point. And so I was still getting that amazing, I'm going to lose my words here because I always lose my words. I was still getting that fresh, new found love of being in a relationship with Christ from my father. And not to say that my mother wasn't the same way. She was, but I can just remember it mostly from my father. And there were times when I would ask him questions, and they were, basically asking like, why is it this way? Why is it like that? Or why did he say that? Or why do we do this? And a lot of times he had a good answer. And then other times, which I found a problem with, was because that's just the way it is. And I hated that. I hated that to my core. I still hate that answer to most. Anytime you ask, why do we do this? Or why is it that way? Just because it is.
To any question.
I hate that answer. And so I found myself going down little rabbit holes, as you could, as a 10-year-old, of, well, what does that even mean? But it was in one particular church that we went to that I think did the most damage. We were in Sunday school. We went to Sunday school and then big church. We did children's church during the morning sermon during big church. We were there on Wednesday nights. I sang in the choir. That is one of my most favorite things to do in church, is to sing in the choir. I have since I was a little girl. We were there. We were constantly at church. We were at all the parties, all the things. And there's one particular memory that sticks out the most to me as being the most damaging. And I still kind of get this little twinge of fear when I think about it. But there was a Sunday school teacher that was very hardcore. And I remember going into Sunday school one morning. I was in youth group. So at this point I was middle school, high school, I can't remember. And she told us that there was a certain way to pray to God. There was a certain way to pray to God for him to hear you. And it wasn't the way that I had been praying to God my entire life. I had been praying to God as if we were friends and I was just talking, and he was talking back and I was talking to him. And it was at that moment that I thought, oh my God, you haven't heard a single thing I've said, because I didn't pray like this. I didn't pray with asking forgiveness for my sins first. And she said, you have to ask for your forgiveness first for him to listen. And I thought, I don't start my prayers with asking for forgiveness. So does he just not hear me? And so I went down this really dark tunnel of just this spiral of, my God doesn't listen to me. He hasn't listened to me my whole life, because I don't start my prayers with asking for forgiveness. And that was, still I get chills talking about it. And I know that that's not true. I know that I can have a conversation with Christ, just like I'm having a conversation with you or anyone else. And he's listening and he's responding. And it's not this, and of course I do ask for forgiveness, but it's not this, well, you have to do this in order for me to hear you. But I held on to that so fiercely for some reason. And I was scared to death that my salvation was all for naught, because I did not pray the right way. And it was really a, I'm sorry, I'm really taking over this, but this was my idea.
Let it out.
I told you, and I've told everyone here, this is very much a therapy session, this podcast for me. But I started, that was a spiraling moment for me in the church. And then I started to notice more things about the people in the church. I started to notice things about the pastor. I started to notice things about the deacons and all of the people that I was surrounded by, these Christians. And I understand, trust me, do I understand that a church is for sinners. A church is a place for people who come to Christ at their lowest, or everyone in a church is broken. And as I was growing up, I did not realize that. I thought that everyone in a church should be the utmost pinnacle, like this is what a Christian is, and that's not what makes up a church. A church is of broken people, of sinners, and that was another breaking point for me when I realized that I had been taught that this is how one should act if you are a Christian, and then I saw all these people acting a totally different way. It kind of broke me a little bit, and then I wondered, like, why was I told that? Like, why was I led to believe that the people I'm surrounding myself from church should be the ones that don't cuss, they don't smoke, they don't do this, they don't do that. And then as I was in high school and getting a little bit older, secrets were coming out, and people that I trusted my entire life were
not what they portrayed themselves
not what they portrayed themselves to be. They were broken. And I think for me, had those people been honest, had they portrayed themselves as the broken sinners that they were, I would have felt better about myself.
Well, and I think that's what's noteworthy, though, is like you said, church is a place for sinners. But the analog that I grew up with was I became vividly aware at about the same age you started questioning things, that there was such a thing as a Sunday morning Catholic. Mm-hmm. In other words, on Sunday morning, they would dress in their best. Mm-hmm. They would all show up to church. They would be the smiling, kneeling, pious, perfect Catholics. And then, because at the town I grew up in wasn't a tiny town like what you grew up in, but it still had a lot of small town feel, and you couldn't fart in the middle. You couldn't fart anywhere in town without 3 people knowing about it within an hour. Like, it just had that kind of feel to it. And like, we knew that a lot of these people who were portrayed themselves to be a certain way did not follow through with that when they were at home. And it wasn't the fact that like they fell or they were broken that bothered me. It was the fact that they portrayed something they weren't. And it almost felt like it felt performatory, it's like being in church all the time, and it's like going through it's like going through what we used to refer to as Catholic aerobics. You stand up, you kneel down, you stand up, you kneel down, you stand up, you sit down. You're supposed to pray at certain times. You're supposed to be quiet.
I never did understand that as a Baptist.
Yes, but regardless, we refer to it jokingly as Catholic aerobics.
Yeah.
But the funny thing of it was like I caught myself thinking one time, I'm like, because I was at a point in my faith where I was really questioning things very, very hard. And I caught myself thinking, like, I wasn't really paying attention to what was going on. I was just kind of zoned out. I was just sitting there, just going through the motions. They say everybody stands up. I stand up, so nobody knows any different. And I was like, I wonder how many people in this room are doing the exact same thing I am.
Yeah.
And they're thinking about the football game that's going to go on in an hour or whatever else.
Might be on.
And they're checked out.
Yeah.
But the thing of it was even then, at my lowest point in my personal faith, I still remember that it was the sermons that caught me, because that was when the Catholic aerobics and the ceremony stopped. And that was just the priest talking to you about a Bible passage and like leading you through his interpretation of it, what he got out of it, comparing it to other teachings. And like, that was the only part of the sermon I was really awake for. Mm-hmm. But like, it's a lot like you said, I accept that you don't have to be a perfect Christian. Nobody is. Like yeah. I tell people all the time, I'm like, the only man that was ever perfect, we hung him on a cross 2,000 years ago. So everybody else gets a little bit of grace for not being perfect. But using dishonesty to cover that imperfection, I think is what you're talking about. That's the problem.
And that was one of the ways I was hurt so badly by the church. Not so much by the church, but by the people of the church.
Because it makes you feel like nothing you do can be perfect enough, because all these other people are perfect and you're the one with problems.
And I still struggle with that. For instance, on the last episode while we were at camp, I said, shit. I said the word shit. And my uncle called me and he goes, I thought we were raising values. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're so right. I shouldn't have said that word.
Have you heard what I say on the podcast sometimes?
But then as the week went on and I knew we were doing this episode, I was reminded of all of those people in the church that portrayed someone different than what they were in their real life. And sorry, I cuss. I cuss like a sailor. I'm married to a veteran. I cuss.
She doesn't cuss that bad.
I cuss. Well, I do, but I cuss, but you cuss a lot worse than I do. And it's at the point now where people try to hide like saying a word in front of Piper, and Piper's like, my mom and dad say it. I've heard it. She just knows she can't say it, because there have been a few times where she has said a bad word and my mama heart has broken into a million pieces. So I told her she can't say a bad word until she's moved out of my house. And I know that that's not real, but I know you gave me that look, but I know that that's not real.
Did you not curse till you moved out of your parents' house?
No.
Okay.
I know that can't happen. I know that can't happen. But it made it all the more important for me to want to bring this episode to everyone, because I don't want people to hear that last episode and be like, oh my God, she said a bad word. I thought we were raising value. And I know my uncle was just joking, but
it was.
I just wanted to, I don't want to be that person that puts on a front and is fake to others to show them that I'm this quote unquote good Christian.
You already told them we're wearing pajamas, like just out of view of the camera. So like we've kind of put all of our cards out on the
table.
And
not only that, but I mean, it's Sunday morning and we're streaming live at 10 o'clock when we should be in Sunday school, when a lot of people are in church right now.
Save that for Christian values.
I am. I'm going to save that for Christian values. I am. Anyway, back to my story of, as it started to spiral, I started to notice not just the people of the church, but the pastors, the preachers of every church that I have attended, and we have attended together as a couple, were such huge letdown to me. And why in my head as a kid, I thought preachers should be put on a pedestal as the least sinner, the least person that is doing the sinning. I mean, they're in the Bible all day, every day. They're constructing sermons and they are interpreting what Christ has taught us. And of course, they should be the ones that are, of the highest respect of the people, right? They were the biggest letdowns. They were the most heartbreaking, the people that brought the most heartbreak to me, not just the people, because at the one point that I realized that I did actually fit in with the people of the church, the congregation, because we were all broken, sinning people, I then had to deal with the letdown that, oh yeah, the pastor is human too. And that hurt. That hurt, because each one of them let me down personally, and not just I'm a part of the congregation, but personally let me down. I'm trying not to cry. I always cry on these episodes. I always cry on raising values. It is therapy. I won't go into exactly what happened, but for each one. But I will tell you that decisions were made by the first preacher that I ever remember in my life. He made a decision to have a conversation with my sister at the behest of my parents. And it was something so sinful and so awful. I couldn't believe it when my sister told me what he was instructing her to do. I guess just a little backstory. She had come home pregnant.
Phoebe or
Gabriel? She had come home pregnant, and a conversation was had. And it was, as you can imagine, very difficult, one, to have that conversation. It wasn't me, so I can't imagine. I really can't imagine having that conversation with my parents, let alone my pastor telling me I should end the life of a child. That was horrible. The second one was my family went through a very tumultuous time, I will say. My parents were going through a divorce, and it was at that point the pastor, the deacons, and the congregation decided this family must go. And we were kicked out of the church. Kicked out of the church because of sins, quote unquote sins that were happening. And it was so hard for me at that point to look at a church and say, that's where I belong. Because as a sinner, I was kicked out by other sinners. My family was kicked out by other sinners who had prioritized their sins over ours. Their sins were less than what the sin of my family was. And it wasn't anything horrible. It wasn't anything that others in that church had not done. You know, divorce was rampant in the 90s. It's still rampant. It's even more rampant now. But divorce and infidelity was rampant in that church. And for them to close their eyes and say, not me, but thee, you get out. Yeah. And we were kicked out of the church. And it was heartbreaking to see, of course, what was happening in the home was already heartbreaking enough of what was going on. And it wasn't just a quick one. It was years of dealing with my parents' marriage fallout.
Y'all were still dealing with it when I came around the family in 2005. I mean, I only came in, I feel like, kind of on the tail end of a lot of this when y'all had already mostly compartmentalized things. Mm-hmm. But like, even that first Christmas I spent with your family, it was extremely apparent that those wounds were still fresh.
Oh yeah. And sometimes that scab comes off and and they're still a little fresh, and it's been many years, and my parents have gotten through the worst, they're remarried and they're back, they're remarried, and they tend to their own relationship. And
I remember when you and I went to Alabama and saw the marriage certificate on the fridge, and both of us looked at each other with the exact same look on our face, like, what?
Well, they had been living together, and
they'd been divorced for how many years at that point?
Well, what was super weird was they were divorced and still living together.
Yes.
That was the weird part. The certificate was more like a, wait, what? Like, okay, whatever. And then I was just like, you know what? You do you, boo. That wasn't a saying at the time, but that's how I felt. It was like, you know what? Y'all do you, and whatever makes you happy. Anyway, so we were kicked out of the church, and that was beyond heartbreaking. But what made it even worse, which added salt to the wound, were people from the church would reach out to me. How are you doing? How are things? Are y'all doing okay? And it's like, you had an active part in kicking me out of a home that I lived in. I was there twice on Sunday, once on Wednesday, and every time in between, my family was there, and you had an active part in removing us from that home so quickly. It was one weekend we came for Sunday service, the next weekend we weren't allowed in the doors. We weren't allowed. And
guilt is a thing, apparently.
I guess so, but there were never any apologies. There were never any, we were wrong in making this decision.
It's because apology requires courage. Apology requires courage.
Yeah.
Quietly reaching out to you behind the church's back was the easy way for them to let themselves off the hook, but to apologize for wrongdoing takes courage. You know that from issuing apologies in the past. And most people are just not courageous people.
No, they're not. And then
they're not the type of Christian that would have stood in the Coliseum in front of the lions with a smile on their face, put it that way.
Right. And so it was either a junior, I can't remember if I was a junior or senior in high school when all that went down. I was an active participant in a youth group, I can tell you that, and I never went back to that youth group, which made me very sad because, we lived in a small town, so I saw all those kids at school the next day, which was very awkward. And I know that their parents had said something to them. We remained friends, very weird friendships, but we remained friends. We're not, I mean, I'm not friends with most of them. I see them on Facebook and talk to them a lot no, not a lot on Facebook, I'm sorry. But anyway, that is what broke me of my church going. And whether or not I believe that people of any congregation are sinners and the broken people doesn't even really matter to me anymore, because as I continue to try churches after that instance, I found the same fake facade in every single congregation that I went to, and I didn't want to be a part of it again. I didn't want that fake facade, finding out some secret of my life that could end my relationship with that church, and then those fake sinners kicking me out again. Not that I would ever do anything to be kicked out of the church, but of all the places that a person should be as they go through a hard time, through sin, and yes, what happened with my family is in the Bible as a sin, shouldn't the first place they be welcome to is church?
I mean, Jesus did not distinguish between tax collectors, prostitutes, and pious people.
Shouldn't my preacher at that point called us all in and said, we need a heart-to-heart. Let's talk through this. Let's get through this together as a family. But instead, the door was open and the boot was kicked. And we never went back. And anyway, so I hate crying. I hate crying on live streams and everything else.
But this is therapy.
It took me years. It took me what?
Almost,
after Piper was born, to step foot in another church. And that was with you. And we decided to check out a Methodist church in our town in Manville.
Yeah, which leads to the second time I was personally let down by the church.
And the third for me.
Yeah. Actually, no, that time was that was the third. See, my letdowns for the church were, I kept throughout so I was raised Catholic, and I don't have any horrible stories or misgivings about the church I grew up in or the Catholic Church. I was the type of young person who questioned a lot of things. And I didn't question things that were in the Bible because, it's the Bible. It's been passed down through thousands of years of oral tradition and writing. It is, if you're a believer and if you walk in the faith, the Bible comes literally from the teaching of Jesus Christ. It's been handed down by his apostles, so on and so forth. So if it was in the Bible, I didn't question it. There might have been times where I felt like, after translating through 3 different languages, over 2,000 years of different dialects, maybe you had to use a little bit of alliteration, if that makes sense, to interpret the teachings. But I didn't question it. I questioned the things that weren't in the Bible that I kept getting told were part of mainstream Catholicism. So there were times where the Pope at the time would issue some proclamation. And I remember a couple of times in particular, that the popes were proselytizing the faithful about things that I could find no reference to in the Bible. I could find no reference to in the teachings. And that was the beginning of my fall from Catholicism, because I kept feeling like, I don't know where this influence or this belief is coming from. It's not coming from the Bible. It's not coming from Christianity. So where's it coming from? And my attempts to reject those messages were met with, I would say, anything from skepticism to mild outrage by other churchgoers. And I would say, but it's not in the Bible. Why is this being taught? And because that's the way it is, or because the Pope said so, is the typical answer, which I came to a point in my young life, in my life as a young Catholic, where because the Pope said so, held no water with me. I became, I guess that was my early black pill existence, but I became very, very much of the mindset of the Pope, the bishops, the priests and the deacons are no more holy than I am. I can have a conversation with my Creator, me to Him, personal, and seek absolution for my sins and seek understanding. And I don't need this hierarchical, dictatorial, the only way for you to understand Jesus is through the church. And I rejected that wholesale.
Mm-hmm.
So that was me leaving Catholicism, though I did lose touch with Christian faith for a couple of years. I mean, most people in their teens and 20s kind of stray off the path a little bit. I strayed, as most people did. And it was honestly going to Iraq, which like very, very violently reasserted.
Oh, no, you're back over here.
Oh, yes. Well, but, and I don't know if I ever talked about this on either of these podcasts, certainly not this one, but not even on Matter of Facts. But like when I got my orders to go to Iraq, I had this real like realignment of my world where I knew what the death toll in Iraq was. It wasn't like World War I death toll, but there were a lot of people coming home missing limbs.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew what the ultimate outcome of going to war could be. I knew that if I did come home, there was a good chance I was going to come home missing a limb, which I wasn't really looking forward to, being an invalid for the rest of my life. And I went to church for the first time, didn't go to a service. We had we called it the prayer room, but it was like a perpetual adoration chapel. So it was just a quiet place for a person to go pray anytime they felt the need to, even when church wasn't holding a service. And I went there and I just sat and prayed. And I came back to Christianity at that moment, and that carried through my entire life. I firmly believe that those moments of prayer helped me to accept what was happening around me and get through that time of my life. But it did mean that by the time you and I walked into this Methodist church, I'd already felt let down by the Catholic Church because I do recall there were a couple times where the Pope started he started dipping his toe into the water of like, well, good Christians basically should support things like gun control, which is a complete, y'all can't see the shirt through the beer, but like, shall not be infringed. I'm a gun owner. No surprise there, especially for the people that have been listening to Matter of Facts podcast for 7 years. Mm-hmm. But so there was that. There was when the Catholic Church went through allegations of like priests molesting and abusing, young altar boys. I saw the Catholic Church, top to bottom, really take a much less helpful, much more aggressive stance with law enforcement than I would have liked. Like my point of view was if these priests have even an allegation of wrongdoing, we should be closing ranks and finding out if they're guilty or not. If they are, hand them over, because we have to hold these men to a higher standard. Like, I understand guilty till proven innocent, but when you have people making allegations, I saw this. I saw some of the more high profile cases. I saw the diocese and even even the Vatican just really not cooperating with those investigations, and that really drove a stake into like the heart of my Christianity at that point. Because I was like, these men have to be held to the highest standard of morality, of conduct, and if there is any inkling that they are sinning, we have to deal with them. We don't have a choice here. I didn't see that. I didn't see what I was hoping to see. And then by the time we walked into this Methodist church, after already being let down twice by the Catholics, I thought to myself, I'm like, okay, we'll give this whole organized religion thing another try, an honest try. And at first, it seemed like it was going okay. And then I don't remember how it showed up on my radar, but it came to my attention that the United Methodist Church, the parent organization for that and many other Methodist churches here in the U.S., was actually like outright advising members of its church to push for gun control laws. And I was immediately, like, my alarm bells went off full blast, because I remember this from the Catholic Church and the Pope. years and years, like probably, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago. Like I remember this, and I remember there's nothing in the Bible that talks about disarmament. There's nothing in the Bible that talks about pacifism above all else, above all other principles. There's nothing in the Bible that says we shouldn't have a right to defend ourselves or defend each other. And yet here is another religious organization pushing this belief. And I was very troubled. Trouble is probably putting it lightly. I think I had a moment of like sheer just white rage. And I talked to you about it. I emailed our preacher because I genuinely like wanted to have a conversation and be like, help me to figure this out. Because I have these set of personal beliefs. I'm a combat veteran. I served. I know from the way the world works that in order for peace-loving people to have a peaceful world to live in, you need people on walls with guns. It is required. There is no option in reality for peace to exist without the threat of violence to maintain it. And I wish we lived in a world where that wasn't the case, but utopia doesn't exist, and Jesus has not come down to the earth yet. So until all that happens, the only way you get a world where you and our daughter can live in peace with an expectation of peace and not being harmed is if somebody stands in the front yard with a rifle and says, if you hurt my family, I'm going to freaking hurt you back. Wish it wasn't that way, but that is the way. These religious organizations kept, in my opinion, in my view, trying to strip that away, trying to say, well, you should be a pacifist. You shouldn't be violent. You shouldn't do this. And I'm like, but that conflicts with the reality. And that is not in the Bible. And if it's not in the Bible, I refuse to accept it. And then our preacher did probably the only thing he could do, because he isn't going to go toe-to-toe with the parent organization of his church.
Yeah.
And he's certainly not going to engage with me, like seeing the obvious conflict. He just refused to answer, which was probably the worst thing he could have done for you, because that was when you just fell flat at that moment.
It was another one of those times when I believed that the preacher should have called us in and said, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this. But instead, he made a silent decision, but it was the loudest he could have ever done. And he left a member of his church who was hurt by the decision. You were hurt by the decision, angry and upset, which, side note, one of the best things my father ever told me when I was growing up was, it's okay to be upset with God. It's okay to be upset with his decisions for your life, but you have to accept them and move on, because ultimately he knows what is best for you. And as a teenager, that was really hard.
Oh, yeah.
But he should have responded, and eventually he did respond, because you kept at it. And I was really glad and happy and like proud of you for keeping at it, because this was something of your faith. This was something of your not salvation, that's not the right word, but this was something that was so deeply embedded in who you are, that you have reached out now probably 3 or 4 times to the preacher with dead silence as a return. And when he finally did respond, it wasn't like we didn't see him in Sundays, at church on Sundays.
Shook his hand
every morning, and he knew who we were.
Oh yeah, because I mean, you sung at that time, like you were in the choir every day,
very active in the choir,
and
we had very, very very good conversations. That he grew up in the same place that I grew up in.
He was
hometown. From the same hometown, which I thought was really weird how we both ended up in the same church. He was whatever. He knew who we were. We shook his hand every morning, whatever, as we were leaving. And he still remained silent. And then finally, when he did respond, it was such a by the book, this is how I should respond to this question response, that I could no longer reach out to him. He had then broken my faith of, I am supposed to be able to reach out to my pastor for more than just the sermons on Sunday. I'm supposed to be able to turn to him or her and ask for further guidance. And that's what we were asking for, was further guidance in this situation. It wasn't just explain to me what the United Methodist Church has decided to do. It was, how exactly am I supposed to feel about this? Like, help walk me through this. And he turned around. He turned his back to us, and that was it. That was it for me. At that point, as much as it broke me, I wasn't going to be able to sing in the choir anymore, and I wasn't going to be able to fellowship with other Christians. I couldn't step through another church door.
Yeah, it was very, very analogous to the Baptist church closing ranks and turning their backs on your family in your moment of need.
Yeah, talk about flashbacks.
Yeah. No, but I mean, and like I said, I mean, I feel like we've given organized religion in various churches an honest chance, and I don't feel like I feel like there's missing elements there.
Mm-hmm.
But
I know we need to move on. It's been 45 minutes.
Well, but it's been therapeutic
for both of us.
So Christian values. I feel like this is a part where I feel like this is a part where simultaneously a lot of Christians in the audience are going to be like, okay, that makes sense. And there's going to be a couple of things that they're going to be like, huh?
I think that's going to be a lot of this episode.
So, like, you know, Christian values, like, no surprise. You know, like, we believe in the teachings of Jesus Christ. We believe that God is our creator. We believe that Jesus died for our sins. He was raised. Like, in my eyes, in my opinion, if it's in the Bible, it's non-negotiable. Mm-hmm. And that is also like a tenet, is that you can't add to the Bible, you can't subtract from the Bible, which I know gets a little controversial with the fact that we know that there are books that were removed from the King James Bible, but again, if it's in the Bible, it's non-negotiable. Mm-hmm. I believe at its core, like the Ten Commandments, if you believe in the teachings, the Ten Commandments, like everything in the Bible, is oral tradition. It's a history of Jesus and his chronicles. It's various things. But the Ten Commandments is unique in the Bible in that those 10 commandments were literally struck on a stone tablet from a lightning bolt from heaven, directly from God. Mm-hmm. So I tend to kind of like categorize the Bible in that way of everything in the Bible is very instructive. The Ten Commandments are law, because that is literally from the fingertip of God to the earth.
Well, it's like this is your syllabus, and then here we're going to break it down. Those 10 commandments are these are the rules. Now let me explain those rules to you, is the rest of the Bible.
Yeah. Well, let me give you the context to help you to understand why those things are the way they are. And I feel like with regards to like what we would call traditional Christian values, I don't feel like there's a lot of surprise there. Like, we do live that, and we do try to live that in our daily lives. It's not, It was always very important to me that I never fall into the trap. I saw so many others fall into the trap of being a Sunday morning Christian. Yeah. Where on Sunday morning, you get dressed up, you go to church, you stay with all the other Sunday Christians, and then you come home and it's beer and the football game and sin and the debauchery and everything else. It was like, no, if you can be a Christian, if you can be a perfect Christian for an hour, you can be a perfect Christian for the rest of the week. I'm not a perfect Christian. I'll be the first one to admit it.
There are no perfect Christians, because we are still human.
So I go to church and stand there as a sinner, as an imperfect human being, without the facade. And I think that's what's always been very important to me, is that we never we honestly portray ourselves as what we are, as who we are. And I think and honesty is a Christian value, in my opinion. We might implement it a little bit differently than some other people do, but like, to me, it's like, I don't hide who I am or what I am or what I believe. This is my version of honesty to everyone. This is who I am, and I'm not perfect.
That is something that I struggled with. I still struggle with from time to time, is not creating a facade. I think I don't attribute acting the way that I do to just the damage that the congregations of the churches that I've been in, that's not just the fault doesn't just lie there. The fault also lies with myself and trying to be someone that I'm not. But as I've grown older and a little wiser, and all my wisdom highlights up here will show you that I am comfortable with myself finally enough to be like, no, I don't believe that, or no, I don't like it when you do that, or yes, we're going to do it this way, or this is how, I'm more comfortable with the decisions that I make in my life. And so slowly, very slowly, the facade that I built has started to fall away, is falling away, is almost gone. I'm almost to the point where, like me or love me, I don't care. You can, or hate me or love me, you can leave if you don't like it. Mm-hmm. But I certainly don't want to be that person that someone walks away from and goes, was she being fake with me?
Let there be no doubt.
Yeah, was that laugh real? Was that a real laugh? Was she really laughing with me? Was she really connecting with me emotionally right then? Or was that just all fake? Because I do know people that are like that, and they're in their 50s, 40s, and 50s. And I walk away from them going, I don't think that was genuine. I think, and you learn to deal with those types of people as you grow a little bit older, and you learn what to say and not to say to them, because you know what's going to happen if you say something. But yeah, I don't want to be that person, especially on this podcast, that says, I'm perfect, look at me, and look at how we're doing things, and this is how you should also do things, because that is the furthest thing from the truth. But I'm also, I'm that person that comes home, and when I've had a really crappy day, I'm not the nicest person. When I haven't had anything to eat in a long time, or I'm really hangry.
She had to apologize to me the other day for being hangry.
I was really hangry.
And I tried to get you to stop and eat.
But I couldn't see past the hangry.
I even I literally said, you're getting hangry, you need to stop and eat. And you bit my head off.
I know, but.
And then as she is like aggressively putting food in her mouth, about an hour later, she's like, I'm so sorry.
I was angry, and that happens. It happens to the best of us, really. But to end that one conversation with, I don't want to be fake. I don't want you to listen or watch these podcasts and then think I know the real person behind that podcast, and that is not how they are. Because you know what? Every now and then a cuss word is going to come out on this podcast, just because that's just who I am, and I cuss. But to get back to the Christian values, what I think is so important, and the word, again, with my words, I really have a hard time with words. What I think is so important about us is that we went through all those things, and we still held on to our Christian faith. We still walked with Christ. And there were times after my car accident where a lot of questions were thrown up to heaven, and a lot of questions and a lot of anger was thrown up to heaven, going, why?
That's the next one.
Oh, okay. Well, I won't go there then.
I'm just going to let her order all these talking points next time, because...
Sorry, I'll stop there, but I'll go back into it. But what I'm trying to get at is, during all of my life in walking in faith with Christ, when it came down to bringing that to our family and how we were going to raise Piper, all of that was reflected upon. And just like in marriage, just like in our relationship, there were things that I knew I was going to do and things that were not going to happen. And so those Christian values are carried down. We don't go to church. And I used to feel really guilty about that. But I don't anymore, because my salvation and my walk with Christ is very evident in this house. We talk about it daily. I can't think of a day that God doesn't come up in this house. And a lot of the things that I feel are important raising a child in Christian faith are done. when Piper comes to me at night and she's scared, maybe she's woken up from a bad dream or something, the first thing I say to her a lot of times when I'm not in just this sleeping stupor of, whatever, is let's pray about it. Let's go to Christ. Let's talk to him. He already knows that you're scared. He already knows what your dream was. Let's now talk to him about it. One of the best days of my life was laying in that hammock outside. It was an Easter Sunday. We weren't in church, and Easter is my favorite holiday. It is the resurrection. It is why I am a Christian and why I am saved and going to heaven. And my journey on earth is just a blink of an eye of the rest of my journey in existence. Piper and I were laying in the hammock, and I was singing old Christian hymns to her, and we're just singing, and we're talking about what Easter means to us and talking about faith and all that stuff. And my daughter, I think she was probably 7, maybe 8, 7 or 8. No, she was probably 6 or 7. She said that she wanted to go to heaven, and she believed that Christ had died for our sins and that he was the Son of God and is the Son of God. And I know that this is different from the Catholic religion, but growing up in the Baptist religion, you pray the sinner's prayer and you accept Christ into your heart. You ask Christ to come into your heart, and you live by his teachings and his values and Christianity every day, and you walk in faith every day. And that was one of the things of growing up in the Baptist church was a lot of teachings were built in fear, and especially like with that prayer, if you didn't pray this certain way, Christ didn't hear you. At the time when I was growing up, we had heaven's gates and hell's flames, and so salvation was brought to youth through fear. If you didn't do this is what you were going to get. You were going to go to hell. You were going to burn for forever, and your eternity with Christ was no longer there.
It was the threat of punishment rather than the promise of reward.
Right. And so I can't be the only millennial growing up in a Baptist church, or I don't even know if there were other religions out there, other sects of Christianity that teach through fear. And I don't know if it's still that way, but growing up, it was your salvation was through fear of what was to come if you didn't. And I didn't want that for my child. But anyway, back to what I was trying to say. In the Baptist religion, you pray the sinner's prayer, you accept Christ for who he was and is, and you basically pledge to live your life as a Christian for the rest of your life. And once you're saved, you're always saved. No matter if you commit murder, you do whatever horrible acts of a human that you can, you're still saved. You're still you're still a child of Christ, and you're still going to go to heaven. And that's great. I think that that's wonderful because it does open the door or leave the door cracked that you can always come back to your faith like you did.
Yeah, absolution.
Yes, thank you. See, I need you for words. So anyway, I helped my daughter pray that sinner's prayer because even at 6 or 7 years old, she was a sinner. Now, children come to Christ in a different way than an adult comes to Christ. Children are viewed differently to Christ than adults are. But she prayed that sinner's prayer, and I know it worked. I know that she prayed that with tears in her eyes. She prayed that prayer. So I know she felt the Holy Ghost. I know she felt the Lord's presence with her in that hammock with me. And I probably cried the rest of that day because I knew at that point my child was going to go to heaven with me, which is the best feeling as a mother, as any parent. You know that your child has been saved by faith. And so even though we don't go to church, there are still, every day there are pieces of our faith that are intertwined with our everyday life in this church, in this house. And I'm so happy for that. I know that there's a wall next to me that has 2 hymns, old Baptist hymns on the wall. It is well with my soul, and to God be the glory, great things he has done. And I remember there was one trip we were going to North Louisiana, and we had left in the afternoon, so it was really late, and we were all very tired. And I was probably very delusional at this point, because I remember it being very late, and I'm on my phone, and I'm just singing every old hymn I can remember singing in church. And I'm singing it, one, in just, I love singing. I loved being in the choir. But two, those songs were such, the songs were what held me to my faith. The messages that were written in those songs, I know that is what really kept me grounded. And I wanted to sing those songs, and I wanted my daughter to hear those words and hopefully have the same impact on her that they did on me. I don't know if they did or not. She was probably like, Mom, please shut up. It's been 2 hours of you singing old hymns, but whether or not it worked. But I to end this rambling, I find it that has been very important for me, and I know for you, to bring our faith and our personal walks with Christ into this family on a daily basis, because we're not in church, and so our daughter has to get it from somewhere. And it's one reason why when we go on a trip, we always pray before we leave the driveway. Before the car gets in drive, we hold hands together and we pray. We don't always pray before our meals, but we do when we're with our large family. Prayer is in this house. Our faith is in this house. There are pieces of Christ all throughout this house. And I have to make it an everyday thing for me, because I have to be that example to my child of, this is what it means to be a Christian. This is what it means to walk in faith. This is what it means to have Christ as your father,
And a couple other things before we have to get to the last topic. Just cap off one thing you said, one thing I brought up earlier. The whole discussion about like pacifism, disarmament, all that, that's kind of, there have been attempts to kind of spoon feed that into organized religion a few times. I think the value that we can pull from like the life of Jesus Christ is, bear in mind that Jesus did have a moment where he like chased people around the temple and whipped them and flipped over the money tables. I mean, that did happen. So an outburst of violence, an application of violence cannot be innately wrong, because I mean, the only perfect person there ever was violently angry about what was going on in his father's house. But I will say that for the majority of the rest of Jesus' life, he was a very peaceful person. He was a calm person. He was a pious and a very stoic person. So I think the value that like I try to bring forward is, I try to I live a life where I hope for peace. I want peace. I want calm. I want stoicism. I don't want constant upheaval, and I don't want violence. But I'm always willing to get the whip out, flip over your table if necessary. So I think that to me is the value, the Christian value that I try to live. And it's the one that I can get behind, because again, I can draw a direct link back to the Bible and to Jesus' life and say, it's here. This is where I'm drawing this from. This is the behavior I'm trying to emulate. Not that I ever believe I'll come close to Jesus. But something you said earlier about how or something that we've talked about, how we constantly try to live Christianity in our daily life, and we try to I hate to use the words lead by example, but we try to. Like, I know this was a disagreement you and I had back before we'd been together for very long, and you had some misgivings about the Catholic Church, and you felt that there was too much emphasis on you have to perform certain acts to earn your way to heaven, which is vastly different from what the Baptists teach. And my perspective has always been, but if you truly believe this, you will do these things. It's not that doing the thing gets you to heaven, but because you try to walk in Jesus's footsteps, you will do these things regardless.
Right.
And if you don't do these things, it's not because you don't want to, it's not because you don't want to go to heaven. It's because you cannot follow in the footsteps of Jesus and not do these things. It's like a fish has gills and breathes underwater. If it doesn't have gills and doesn't breathe underwater, it is not a daggum fish. Discussion over. It can't be, because having gills and breathing underwater is part of its nature. Well, our nature as Christians is to want to be patient with each other, even though we fail. It is to want to be pious, even though we fail. It is to want to be all these things that we take from the life and from the teachings of Jesus, even though we fail all the time. But it is the want to walk that path, even though that we will falter. So I think that by living that every day, I hope and I believe that we as a family and our daughter gets more value than if we take her to church and she's a Christian for an hour a week. Yeah. Because in this household, whether we specifically outright say, this is why this is this way, it is this way because of our belief, because of our teachings, because of what we hold in our hearts. Mm-hmm. So we do our best to be Christians 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, mm-hmm. even though we might fail. But I believe that is a better analog than to be a Christian one day, like 1 hour a week in church, stand with all the other Sunday morning Christians. And then for the rest of the week, you just feel like, okay, I've checked that checkbox. I don't have to do it anymore.
Like, we've gone. Let's get to lunch and the football game.
And the other thing I was going to say was, like, we said this earlier, but like we both have a belief that we have a personal relationship with God, mm-hmm. that we pray directly, mm-hmm. that there are no gatekeepers in our Christian beliefs. There is no priest, there is no pope, there is no one we have to go through to talk to our Creator, because the commonality is that Christians traditionally have always referred to God as the Father, and you have no gatekeeper to go talk to your Father.
Right.
So why would we as Christians? I don't have to go stand in front of another sinner and pray for forgiveness to my sins so that my Father will hear me, or speak to my Father a certain way so that he will hear me. Because my Father understands that I am talking to him because I need his counsel, I need his forgiveness, I need his patience. I need him because he's my Father. And if I speak to him imperfectly, he's not going to discount what I'm trying to say. He will see through the imperfection and say, I understand what you're trying to get across.
So
we'll work on your grammar later.
I actually say this a lot in my prayers, because a lot of times when I'm rambling to Christ, when I'm rambling to God, it's usually at the end of the day and my brain is wiped.
Fried.
But there are a lot of times where I will say this, and I will always say this. I know it's hard to understand me, but you created me this way. So you have to be able to understand me. You created me to ramble and not find words. And I am who I am. So I know that this prayer is going to make sense to you.
And that's another Christian value, though, is our belief that we were created. We didn't just happen. We were created. Like, that used to be my retort whenever I would have some argument with some church official about it didn't matter what it was. And I would basically say, well, if God created all of us and he created all of us in his image, then he didn't create me in this certain way, which is un-Christ-like, because he made me this way. Like, and I had a lot of these misgivings and conversations around, like, when I made the decision to enlist. And it was like, on the one hand, I'm told I should be a pacifist, but on the other hand, like, I feel this innate drive, this pull to defend other people. There's no way that this part of me that's so deeply rooted in hating bullies, in detesting strong people, lording over it and abusing weaker people. There's no way that is un-Christ-like if it's always been a part of me since I was little. So to say that it is to me, in my eyes, is to say that either God didn't create you, which I don't buy, or God screwed up when he made you, which I don't believe either. Or option 3, which is this thing you're saying is not Christ-like. It has to be. It has to be. Jesus responded to people that have been abused and downtrodden with love, with comfort, with hugs, with anything he could to help boost their spirit back up. I have a little bit of a different method, but it comes from the same place. It's like, I hate to see these people beat down for no reason that I can see. There was one other thing I wanted to talk about before we move on to the next one. It was a perfect dovetail to go to the next one. Oh, I know what it is. You said earlier that we don't have to understand our Father's will to accept it. That is a value. That is the hardest. It is, and seriously, it is the hardest value, and it goes perfectly to our last talking point.
Let's do it, because
the hardest Christian value to live is to accept what happens. To accept that your prayers sometimes they're not going to be answered the way you wanted them. What happens is going to suck sometimes. It's not what you wish had happened. It might seem completely counterintuitive, but you have to separate the need to understand from acceptance. Like, I have to accept, and this is also why, like, since we've kind of talked about the way we pray for a lot of years. I couldn't tell you when I started doing this. I've made a point to not pray for specific outcome. I don't pray to God like, let me get this job, or if someone's sick, let them pull through. I pray for his will to be done, because whatever he wants to happen is going to happen. I'm gonna have to learn to accept it. I pray for peace. I pray for comfort for me and for the people who are in this time. I pray for basically assistance to accept whatever is going to happen.
I think that's the most important, because when I started praying about, whatever the outcome is, your will be done. I mean, you hear that all the time. Your will be done.
It's going to be.
Well, yeah, whether you like it or not. I too started praying with the acceptance of your will being done, because sometimes praying for peace and comfort means that peace and comfort isn't going to come until after the hardship.
Sometimes it might be praying for peace and comfort because what his will is going to be painful for us.
Yeah. I
mean, that's the truth of the matter. Sometimes what he has ordained must happen is going to hurt. I mean, let's consider for a moment the fact that our Father literally watched his only son be crucified on earth. Can't tell me for a moment that wasn't his will, because if it wasn't, no one would have been able to hammer the first nail through Jesus' skin if God had said, that's not going to happen. And I would argue, because again, I read the Bible, and a lot of New Testament is really cool if you stop and think about it. But like, if you think about the story of the crucifixion, there's a moment when the soldiers are laughing and jeering and mocking Jesus, telling him to come down off of the cross if he's the Son of Man. And the earth shakes, the sky turns black, lightning leaches out across the sky. And I think to myself, I'm kind of thinking God might have been a little bit pissed off that you're like, he is sacrificing his only child to absolve you of your sins, and you ungrateful heathens are making fun of him. And to think about that, realize that, like, to look at all the interpersonal dynamics involved in this, Jesus was staying on that cross willingly, because if he'd have wanted off, he'd have come off. Even while he was being made fun of, and his knowing that he had to, like, he even prayed, if it is your will, let it be done. But if this can pass me over, please let it. But it was God's will. It had to happen. He accepted it. And then God, looking down at the situation, saying, you're making fun of my son while he's giving his life for all of you. like, again, sorry for that tangent, but like, I think learning to accept what has to be and accept it, like being able to tolerate it quietly. Like sometimes life's
not
hard.
necessarily quietly.
No.
There have been times when I have like vocally, like not just in my head speaking to Christ or God, but vocally on my hands and knees screaming at him, you know, of accepting something or not.
Yeah. So let's round this out. I feel like we've already talked about a lot of this. Like we talked about like your family's experience with the Baptist church, which I know was hard to maintain your faith through. We've talked about my deployment, which arguably brought me screaming, running back to Christ. But it was a time in my life where, you know, there were lots and lots of reasons to get distracted and not resort to prayer. Faith in hard times is just, I find that separate from Christianity. I find that you learn more about a person when their life sucks.
Yeah.
You know, like when a person is at their lowest, you really learn who they are very quickly. You see the best person turn into the worst person when their life isn't going the way they want it to. And conversely, you see a rotten human being put on a really good show when everything's going okay. And I feel like faith in hard times is difficult. I feel like you really find out how strong a person's faith is and how devout they are and how much they walk in the footsteps of Christ when their life is upside down. Because that is
I disagree with you. I think you find out more.
We always said we were going to disagree about this.
I think you find out more about who a person is in their walk with Christ during good times, because it is almost second nature to turn to Christ when things are bad. Mm-hmm. It is for me. I'm sure it is for others, but I was going to say, but you forget to thank God. You forget to be make him a part of the good times, because it's good times, you know? And I think every day, every night when I lay down in bed, not every night, because I don't pray every night. Sometimes I'm snoring before sometimes I'm a little tired.
It's such a cute little snore too.
Before I start to pray, but because, and I'll say this again, because God knows who he created, he knows that I'm going to lay my head down at night and thank God for the bed, and I thank God for my blankets, and I thank God for our house and the air conditioner and the hot water heater. I thank God for
her family.
Well, I do. I get there. I in my head, I walk through the house, and I thank God for my husband. I thank God for my husband every single day, sometimes multiple times in the day. I thank God for you and putting you in my life and knowing exactly the type of person I was going to need from the time I was 20 years old till now. And in each time of my life, each different hardship or good time in my life since I was 20 years old, I needed the person that you are, and you transitioned with me through all those things. And so I thank God every day for you. And I pray for you every single day. Every day there is a prayer that goes to God for my husband. Same with Piper. There is a prayer that goes to God of thanksgiving for my daughter, for the hard, tumultuous time that I went through during pregnancy and losing our first child, and then all of the postpartum afterwards. There is thanksgiving in the hardships for me. And I am not lying. There is no fakeness about this. I thank God for those hard times. And at the time during those hard times, it's really hard to be thankful for them. Really, really hard. But I have to stop and think, why? Why am I being put through this? There is a lesson here. What is the lesson that God is trying to teach me? And I do that every single day. Anytime there is something uncomfortable about my day, I know that this is God saying, I'm trying to teach you something. Hey, are you listening? Are you watching? I need to watch this, because you're going to learn something here. I'm going to learn you something.
But I was going to say earlier, because you said you run to Christ when things get hard. But I think that's opposite for most people.
You do?
I personally, and again, this could be just a difference of perspective, but I think a lot of people find it the most difficult, and they find themselves the most likely to question God and question his plan and question what's happening when things get hard. Like when you've lost someone important to you, or when your life is looking bleak. I feel like most people, not you, not me, but most people, that is the moment in which their faith is most likely to falter. And when things are going well, that's when it's very easy to be like, well, of course God exists. Look at how great my life is. But again, because of the way you're wired and because of the way I'm wired, when things are good, it's God that made them good. And when things are hard, it is God that will pull us through them. It's a perspective. But for a lot of people, I don't think they make that jump when things are really going wrong for them, that it is this way because it has to be this way. God will pull me through it. He will deliver me. He will make me strong enough to overcome this. But there is a teaching moment here that I have to go through. There is something here I have to learn in order to be who I am ultimately meant to be. And I feel like that is the moment where a lot of people fall short, because they have it in their head that when things are good, it's God's gift. And when things are going bad, it's because God is being ugly to them, or God's not answering their prayers anymore. That gets into the whole thing I was talking about earlier about praying for a specific outcome. Like, I don't pray for wealth, because if God wants me to be wealthy, I'll be wealthy. But I believe he's given me things that are worth more than money.
I think you are the exception to the rule. I think most people during hard times turn to God, especially if
There's going to be a poll coming from the end of this.
There should be, to prove me right. I think that during hard times, most people turn to God to fix the problem, to ask why, to ask for patience and guidance and things like that. I think if a person is of faith, then wouldn't they keep that faith during a hard time, and then during good times they kind of forget like where the good times are from?
It might also be perspective, because you
the
just
blessing.
Well, you said something though. You said if a person is of faith, and what I've heard more than one time from a person who is an atheist, an agnostic, a nihilist, somebody who is not of the faith, is this rational retort of, well, why does God let bad things happen?
Mm-hmm.
They hop completely over that part I talked about, where it was like, this is his will, and there's something I need to learn from this. There's something I need to experience in this, that it has to happen. But from their perspective, a lot of people and have met, but I'm telling you that there's a lot of people out there that are not Christians, that is the reason they're not Christian, is because when bad things happen, it's either God's fault or that's proof God doesn't exist. And that's why I said there was a key word you said there. People that are of the faith. People that are of the faith and truly of the faith should not have their faith diminished or tested by hard times. They should accept it like you do. They should resort to prayer. They should resort to going back, like clinging more tightly to God, because that gives them comfort. There's a lot of people out there that are just they're not Christians, or they're fair weather Christians, which is, I guess, more to my point of, they might go to church, but it's not really in their head and in their heart.
But I think we're kind of saying the same thing.
We usually do that.
During hard times is when Christians will find their faith again, and where they will cling to Christ, like you just said, and look for that comfort. It's during the good times that I am guilty of, not so much anymore, but of forgetting my faith and forgetting where those blessings have come from of good times. And that's why I'm saying, like, it's easy to run to your faith, and it's really, really easy to remember, your faith during bad times, because the first thing that I'm going to do when it's something bad or hard or difficult to go through is I'm going to go to prayer. That is the first thing I'm going to do, because I gotta ask this. I gotta have this conversation with God. Why may not always be answered, but I have to at least let him know what I'm going through.
Can I offer a metaphor?
Okay.
Think about, because again, God is our Father. Think about this from the perspective of a child and a father. I have been, you've pointed out somewhat humorously several times, like I very often talk about things that I learned from my father, things he taught me, things, perspectives he gave me.
You know what your father-in-law would say?
You know what your father-in-law would say in a moment like this? And it only gets worse the
I love
older
my
I get.
father-in-law.
But there is that.
Mhm.
I realize and recognize that a lot of the things that I am able to do now, a lot of I feel like success as a husband and a father is because of the example that I had set.
Mhm.
And if I had never had that example, I wouldn't know what a husband and father was supposed to be. How can you if you don't have an example? But think about the fact that there are a lot of children out there who, once they have kind of made it on their own, they totally forget about all the help, all of the things they were taught. They forget that some component of the success they have is a result of
what their father taught them,
what their mother, father, what their elders taught them. So I guess that's maybe the difference in our perspective, is that my faith doesn't diminish in hard times, but I feel like a lot of people's do. And I feel like a lot of it is because they have it in their head that, like, well, my success is my success.
Mm-hmm.
It's not partly my father's success, or in the case of Christianity, it is totally my father's success that he has gifted me, because it is his will. Mm-hmm. That, I guess, is the difference in my perspective. It's like, that's why in hard times we think, well, the goodwill has been taken away, so God must not like me, or God must be angry with me, or maybe he doesn't exist at all. And then from your perspective, people forget in good times, because, well, this is my success. Nobody helped me do this. Like, this is all the sweat of my brow and all that, good old Puritan work ethic and yada, yada, yada. And it's like both of these groups people were describing totally forget the fact that this is all God's will. And it is not our faith being rewarded necessarily, but it is us forgetting that, whether it be trying times that are meant to mold us and shape us, or it be times of prosperity that are meant to rejuvenate us and allow us to be charitable to others, which is what we're supposed to be. When we have a period of prosperity, whether it's financial or anything else, we're supposed to share that with others. We're supposed to reach out to friends and share fellowship with them. We're supposed to, like, offer to cook dinner for somebody, because sometimes not having to cook dinner, whether it's financially or just not having to dirty up their kitchen, is a windfall. It's when we have moments of prosperity, we're supposed to share that with others, with our other brothers and sisters in Christ. And when we are on following the heart, true. Well, I believe that they're all my brothers and sisters in Christ.
Whether they done another
no, we're not, because we don't have time for it. But, like, everyone else is my brother and sister in Christ, whether they admit it or not.
Okay.
They, like, if you don't think so, I'm gonna pray for you, and I hope that aggravates you.
Well,
but
I just, whether or not you and I agree, or saying the right thing or the same thing, or we're saying different things,
I feel like we're dancing around.
I think we are, and that's fine. But ultimately, I think the end should be, you can't forget Christ in the good times if you're going to remember him in the hard times. Because, yeah.
No, I mean, that's a perfectly good way to tie the two together.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad we agreed on that.
We usually find our way to agree.
Sometimes. The other thing I wanted to say is, you were talking about your father's teachings and your analogy of Christ and all that stuff. And this goes back to Christian values, especially in this household. You are the head of this household. You are also the head of the church in this household, if that makes sense. And I said it one way when we were in Arkansas, but I can't remember how I said it. It was...
You said I was the head of the household, and I said you were my neck.
No. This was something else. It was Easter Sunday. We were driving down the street in the park or whatever, and I said something about how the husband and the father is the leader in Christianity in the house. You are not just the provider of the money that comes in or whatever, you're not just that. You are also the leader in our Christianity in this house. And our daughter she's going to look to me, but just as I was growing up, the one of my two parents that stood out the most in my life with their Christian teachings to me was my father. I know my mother did. I know she took the time to make sure that we were saved, and she prayed for us, and she was a Christian person in our household. But my father is who stands out in my mind, in memories of being that Christian leader in our household. And that is one of the things that, beyond the family being broken and fathers removed from households, that to me is a value that has been removed at the same time, is that Christianity, that walk with Christ, because I view you, and I know Piper views you, as one of the strongest people I know on earth. You have been not just a soldier. You've gone through some pretty hard times. You've been through a lot, but you continue to hit your knees.
Keep it together.
Stop
Come on.
it. You continue to serve as that beacon for me and for her. And as much as I want to make sure that my daughter's Christianity and her salvation is assured, and that she will go to heaven, and that she will find the irresistible urge to walk with Christ, she's ultimately going to look to you, the strongest man that she knows, the strongest parent that she knows. And she's going to watch your walk with Christ. And she's going to see how, even though you are the strongest and you hold this family together, she's going to see that you are still relying on something more than yourself. You know what I mean? And I hope that she's going to carry that with her. I hope it makes as much of an impact on her that it did when I watched my father. Knowing of all the struggles, he still turned to Christ. Of all the good times, he still turned to Christ. He still, to this day, when my grandmother passed away, talks about the day he found Christ. Because it was the best day of his life. And he will say that. It beats being married to my mother. It beats the birth of his children. The day he found Christ is the best day of his life. And it was for me. I'm sure it was for you. I don't know how it was for my 7-year-old child in the hammock. I'm hoping eventually she'll be able to reflect on that. But the man of the house, the husband, the father of the house, holds so much more responsibility, because it's all on your shoulders. I helped carry that burden. I try to carry that burden. But God entrusted you. God entrusted the husband and the father to carry on his word and to carry on his teachings. And he's looking at you not just a provider financially, but you are also the provider spiritually. And that, to me, in our talk of raising values and traditional values and Christian values, is where it starts. And I hope, like you, that there are other men who see that responsibility and take up that cross, just like they always say, take up that, I wouldn't say it's a burden, but that.
No. I mean, it's a burden. I don't believe that burden is necessarily
I don't think it's a burden. I think because of what you're doing, it's not a burden. You know what I mean?
I guess for me, as burden doesn't have to have a negative connotation by its taxonomy.
Okay, we're dancing again, but I just the Christian values in us and the traditional values in us mean that, as you being the head of the household, you being the spiritual head of this household, there's a lot that is forgotten when the father, or a lot that is lost when the father is taken out. And that is one reason why I pray for you every day, because I know how difficult that can be with the responsibility that you bear. And that is the other reason why I pray in thanksgiving for you every day. I couldn't have been blessed more by God's will giving me you. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sappy.
A little bit of sap.
Stop. Now we're both crying, but
I'm not crying.
Yes, you were.
No, I got something in mind.
Okay. Not this. Anyway, I think that's probably the best way to wrap it up. Don't you?
I think so. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I doubt this is the last time we're going to talk about Christianity on this show.
Well, no, because that's part of the basis of the show.
Well, that, and I mean, even if it wasn't part of the basis of the show, it's so deeply ingrained into the two of us. Like I said earlier, like, you will live Christian values by accident if you truly believe.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it does, and I think that is something to walk this out on. Is like, we've tried our very best to implement Christian values in our daily life, in our marriage, in our child rearing, in our interactions with other people. Like, we're the first to admit that we screw up a lot, because, again, only one perfect person, he got hung on a cross, so all the rest of us are allowed to be imperfect. But I feel like we very consciously, very intentionally try to remember who we are meant to be and try to emulate that. And a lot of times we kind of accident our way into behaving like Christians because we just believe that's how we should be. It's how people should be. So it's this weird dichotomy of, like, I tried to do this sometimes, but then I just kind of accident my way into it most of the time.
Yeah.
Kind of like being a husband.
Well, anyway, thank you all for joining us. I know there was a lot of people that came in and out today on the live feed, and of course this audio will drop on Tuesday. So we hope that you either watch the video, listen to the audio, comment, questions, anything else. You know how to reach us. So
how do they reach us? Because, matter of fact, Raising Values have different social media now.
Well, if they're watching us here, then they can just comment here.
But if they're not watching us here, if they're listening to us on the audio podcast, there's links down in the description.
Oh, I guess I'm not as experienced as this 7-year-old podcaster here. Yeah, there's links
Jesus Christ,
in the bio and in the descriptions and all the places, and subscribe. I got to get my marketing on point. So thank y'all for joining us on this episode of Raising Values, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye, everybody.